The sun had started its slow descent behind the jagged hills when Gideon Black caught sight of something unusual along the edge of his north pasture. At first glance, it looked like a dust devil, a tiny swirl of earth kicked up by the wind, but it didn't move like one. It was still, rooted, watching. Gideon reined in his horse, squinting into the amber haze. The figure wasn't even waist-high. A child. A girl. She stood beside his split-rail fence, clutching something in both arms. Her clothes were dusty, too big for her, and her hair hung in snarled ropes down her shoulders. She looked like a piece of the landscape itself, sun-scorched and hardened. He nudged his horse forward slowly. She didn't flinch. When he dismounted and got closer, she tilted her chin up at him. Her eyes were a storm, gray and rimmed in red, too old for her face. "You lost?" he asked. She didn't answer. "You run from something?" Still nothing. He crouched to her level, looking her over. One knee was scraped raw. A bruise shaped like a handprint darkened her upper arm. Her lips moved, but her voice barely came out. "My name's Willa," she said. "My dad did bad things to my sister." Gideon blinked. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. Willa looked past him toward the hills behind the ranch. "Nobody believed us," she said. Then, more quietly, "Until you." He frowned. "I don't know you." She nodded once, firmly. "But you're the one who's gonna help." The way she said it, he almost believed her. Like she wasn't pleading, just telling the truth. Gideon stood up and looked around. No wagon tracks. No horse nearby. Just this tiny girl out here alone. "Where's your sister now?" Willa shook her head. "Locked up." "You run all the way here from town?" "I followed the river. Hid when wagons passed." He rubbed his chin, scratching at the stubble. This wasn't the first time a broken thing had wandered onto his land. But it was the first time it had spoken with such eerie conviction. "You got folks? Somebody to look out for you?" She looked up at him again, slow and steady. "You." It shouldn't have hit him like it did. But it did. He sighed. "Come on." She followed without a word, her little boots crunching over dry grass as they headed toward the ranch house. It sat low against the hillside, weathered and gray, half swallowed by the prairie. Inside, he made her sit by the stove while he fixed her a plate of beans and cornbread. She ate fast, like she hadn't seen a full plate in days. Maybe she hadn't. He didn't ask questions right away. The silence between them settled like dust in the corners. Only when the light had drained from the windows and the fire crackled low did he speak again. "What happened to your sister?" Willa looked into the flames. "Her name's Maybelle. She's 22. Daddy says she's sick in the head." Gideon kept his face blank. "He keeps her in the attic now. Told everyone she left town. But she didn't. I hear her crying when he thinks I'm asleep." "What about your ma?" Willa's eyes dimmed. "Buried under the cottonwood tree. 6 winters ago." Gideon exhaled slowly. "Folks in town think Daddy's a good man," she continued. "He's the preacher. Knows everybody's secrets. He says God forgives him. Says nobody else needs to know." "You try telling anyone?" "I told Miss Delancey at the dry goods store once. She said little girls shouldn't tell stories about their papas." Gideon nodded, almost imperceptibly. "That sounded about right." "You believe me?" she asked. He paused. Then, "I believe you." She didn't smile. Just nodded again, like she'd known the answer all along. Gideon leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Something in his chest twisted. It had been years since he'd let another human stay the night in his home, let alone a child. He'd built this place to keep the world out, not draw it in. But the world had a way of seeping through cracks when you weren't looking. "You sleep in that room there," he said, pointing. "Door stays open. I'll be right here." Willa nodded. She padded over, quiet as a shadow. Before she slipped inside, she turned. "If you help Maybelle, she'll sing again." Used to fill the whole house with songs. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. That night he dreamed of fire. Not the kind that danced in the stove, but the kind that devoured homes and lives and left nothing behind. He saw his daughter, another little girl with tangled hair and a voice like thunder when she laughed. He saw her fade into the smoke, reaching for him. And he saw himself doing nothing. He woke before dawn, heart pounding. The next morning, Willa stood on the porch, watching the hills. "Do you ride?" he asked, stepping out with 2 mugs of coffee, one sweetened with molasses for her. She nodded. "Mama taught me when Daddy was at sermons." He handed her the cup. She held it with both hands, sipping carefully. For a moment, they stood in silence. "You know what'll happen if I go poking around your daddy's business?" Gideon asked. He'll lie, she said. He's good at it. Won't be much I can do without the law. She looked up at him. You ever known the law to help folks like us? He didn't answer. The question didn't need one. You think I'm some kind of hero? He said eventually. Willa thought for a long time. No, she replied. But you don't lie to kids. That makes you different. He laughed once, short, bitter. That's a low bar. She shrugged. It's the one we got. Gideon looked out toward the road where the town lay beyond the hills. He hadn't been back there in months. Maybe a year. He'd made peace with solitude, or so he thought. But now this child stood on his land, hauling her sister's ghost behind her like a sack of bones, and somehow he'd been chosen. Not asked, chosen. I'll take you back, he said. She frowned. What? Town. I'll take you there. We'll see what we can find out. But Maybelle? We'll get her. But not if your daddy sees me coming, with a six-shooter and a grudge. We do this smart. Quiet. She nodded slowly. You'll talk to folks? I'll listen. That's the start of talking, ain't it? Willa didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed. She finished her coffee and set the mug down carefully. I knew you'd help. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He shook his head and turned away, but something in him stirred. Something old. Something like duty. Not the kind preached from pulpits, but the kind carved into a man's bones by grief and silence. By mid-morning they were saddled up and riding east. The trail wound through cotton grass and sun-bleached rock, the sky stretching wide above them like a secret. Willa rode beside him, small and upright, like she'd done this before. Like she'd been born into hardship and made it her saddle. Don't talk much, do you? He asked after a while. She glanced at him. Talking don't help if no one listens. He nodded. He'd learned that the hard way. They rode in silence, the wind humming low in the scrub brush, until the rooftops of town came into view. Your daddy gonna be there? He asked. Willa's jaw tightened. He's always watching. Gideon felt the weight of his revolver at his side. Heavy, familiar. He'd hoped to never draw it again for something personal. But life didn't always respect the wishes of tired men. You sure you're ready for this? He asked. Willa looked ahead, her voice flat. I've been ready since the first time she screamed. He nodded. As they descended the final hill into town, Gideon thought of how stories started. Most folks thought they began with words. But sometimes they started with silence. A silence too long ignored. And this one? This one started with a little girl knocking on a stranger's door, and a man who finally opened it. The town of Ash Hollow sat quiet under the mid-morning sun, its main street lined with buildings that leaned slightly from years of dust storms and wear. Nothing much changed here, not the people, not the paint peeling from the sheriff's office, not the crooked sign above the church door that read, "All welcome who walk in truth." Gideon Black hadn't ridden into this place in over a year, and it looked exactly the way he remembered it, tight-lipped, brittle with politeness and full of secrets. He rode slow, with Willa perched in the saddle behind him. Her arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek against his back. As they passed the general store, two women setting out preserves paused their gossip mid-sentence. One of them, Mrs. Hargreaves, squinted toward the child on Gideon's horse, frowned, and turned away without a word. Willa noticed. They know. They know something, Gideon muttered. What they do with it's another thing. They dismounted at the watering trough near the saloon. Gideon offered her his canteen. Willa drank quietly, eyes flicking from storefront to storefront. The preacher's house sat at the far end of town, whitewashed and trimmed in green, standing taller than the rest. Clean and proud like its owner. From here, the steeple rose like a finger pointed at heaven. Or maybe at them. You stay with the horses, Gideon said. She looked up at him. He'll see you coming. I'm counting on it. He walked toward the church, spurs ticking against the wood plank walk. The air grew hotter with each step. By the time he reached the front steps, the door was already opening. Otis Granger stood in the doorway with his arms outstretched as though greeting an old friend. The man was tall and solid, dressed in crisp black, collar stark against his sun-kissed neck. His hair was perfectly combed, his beard neatly trimmed. Nothing about him looked rushed or guilty. But his eyes, they were too calm. Still water over a deep hole. Well now, Otis said, his voice thick as molasses. Gideon Black. The prodigal rancher returns. Gideon stopped a few feet short. Didn't come for a sermon. No, I suspect not. I reckon it has to do with a child gone missing. More like escaped. Otis smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. You have her? Gideon didn't answer. The preacher stepped aside, motioning toward a pew just inside. "Come in. We'll talk like men." "I'm fine here." Otis nodded once, accepting the distance. "You know, I'd been worried sick about Willa. Girls always had an imagination. Grief does that to young minds. After her mother passed, she took to fanciful tales. Thought you might understand that, seeing as how you've walked through your own losses." Gideon's jaw tightened. "You talk about my wife or my daughter, preacher?" "Just expressing sympathy." Gideon took a slow breath. "You keep your sympathy." A few townsfolk had gathered across the way now, watching, pretending not to. A boy leaned against the blacksmith's post, chewing a sliver of wood. An old man sipped his coffee slower than usual, eyes narrowed. Otis lowered his voice. "You bring a child like Willa into town talking about demons that don't exist, you're stirring poison, Gideon. Folks remember the old you. The one who punched a man clean through a saloon window over a bad card draw. You sure you want to be that man again?" "I don't," Gideon said. "But I will." Otis stared at him. No blink. No twitch. Gideon finally turned and walked back to the horses. Willa was still there, braiding the end of the horse's reins with her fingers. She looked up. "He talk." He smiled. She frowned. "He always smiles. Even when." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. They passed the sheriff's office next. Sheriff Talbot was seated outside, polishing his boot with a scrap of cloth, pretending he hadn't heard every word from across the street. He was built thick around the shoulders, with a sunburned neck and a beer gut he called respectability. His badge gleamed brighter than his eyes. "Black," he drawled without looking up. "Thought you'd retired from trouble." "Funny," Gideon replied. "I was thinking the same about you." Talbot glanced at Willa. She was standing behind Gideon now, fingers wrapped in his coat. "You dragging her into something? Or she dragging you?" "She came to my door. Walked through Coyote Country just to say her sister's locked in an attic. Figured that might be worth your time." Talbot spat into the dirt. "And who told you that?" "A little girl with scraped knees and big eyes. Sometimes that's the only kind tellin' the truth." Talbot stood slowly. "Look, Black. Otis is a preacher. That don't make him a saint, but he's done more good for this town than you have. Ran a school out of his church. Fed folks through 2 winters. No one's ever seen a damn thing wrong. Maybe because no one's looking," Gideon said. Talbot stepped down from the porch. "You think you're gonna come in here with your boots and your gun and your brooding silence and blow holes in a man's life based on hearsay? People will back him. You'll be the outsider again. I ain't here for justice by vote." "Then what are you here for?" Gideon didn't answer. He looked at Willa. Her face had gone still again, that statue stare she wore when people tried to explain away monsters. He turned back to the sheriff. "Where's Maybelle?" "Don't know." "You ask." "No." "Why?" "Because you don't accuse a man like Otis Granger without proof. Sometimes fear is the proof." Talbot's jaw clenched. "Careful where you put your faith, Black. Might find it shot out from under you." Gideon nodded once. "Wouldn't be the first time." They left the sheriff there, boots planted firm, heart planted in the wrong soil. As they walked, Willa tugged at his sleeve. "You see," she whispered. "Nobody wants to believe. Some believe. Just not out loud." They stopped in front of the general store. Inside, behind the counter, was old Myrtle Delancey. She was counting tobacco tins when she caught sight of Willa and froze mid-stack. "Well, I'll be," she murmured, stepping outside. "Miss Myrtle," Gideon said, tipping his hat. The woman's eyes didn't leave the girl. "I thought, well, folks said Otis sent her to live with cousins up in Montana. You believe that?" Myrtle hesitated. "I didn't want to doubt a man of the cloth." Willa stepped forward. "You told me stories don't help no one." Myrtle paled. "I didn't know what he was doing. I swear." "But you heard me," Willa said. "And you did nothing." "I was scared, child." "So was I." Myrtle's lips quivered, but she didn't reply. After a pause, she turned and walked back inside, the door creaking shut behind her. "Will you help us now?" Willa called after her. Silence. The girl looked up at Gideon. "She won't. She's scared." "She should be." They moved on. The weight in Gideon's chest thickened with every step. This town was poisoned by its own silence, by the illusion of civility. Folks here had made a god of reputation and a ghost of truth. They stopped just outside the livery stable. Willa sat on an overturned bucket while Gideon leaned against a fence post. The town moved around them like a slow, muttering beast, unsure whether to growl or pretend it hadn't seen a thing. "Maybelle," Willa said softly. She used to sing me to sleep when Daddy got mad. She held me under the bed once, covered my mouth so I wouldn't scream. I didn't understand then. I do now. He knelt beside her, voice low. We'll get her. But not today. We need to know more. Find cracks in his story. We do this right, not rushed. I'm scared he'll move her, she said. Like before. He studied her face, lined not with years but with truths too heavy for any child. Then he made a promise. If he does, he won't get far. And I'll be the one waiting when he trips. She nodded, but her fingers fidgeted in her lap. Not with impatience, but with fear dressed up as hope. The sky overhead had turned that pale, washed-out blue that came before a storm. Somewhere out on the prairie the wind was picking up. Gideon stood, looking toward the preacher's house again, his jaw set. Otis knew he was here now, and he would be watching. That was good. Let the man feel the heat. Let him wonder how much longer he had. As they turned to leave town, Willa spoke again, barely a whisper. You're not afraid of him, are you? No, Gideon said, staring forward. But he should be afraid of you. Night crept in like a thief, quiet and deliberate, casting long shadows across the ranch house. Gideon stood at the window, his hands braced against the sill, eyes fixed on the horizon. The sky had turned to iron, bruised with storm clouds, and the wind murmured through the grass like a warning. Somewhere behind him, Willa was curled up in the chair with a blanket over her knees, humming under her breath, a low, broken tune she didn't seem to realize she was singing. It sounded like something once beautiful, now cracked at the edges. She sings that too, Willa said suddenly, not looking up. Maybelle. But different. Stronger. Gideon turned from the window. You sure she's still in the house? Willa nodded. He hasn't moved her yet. I know the sounds. When he locks the attic, it clicks 3 times. I can still hear it. Then tonight's our only shot. Willa sat up straighter, eyes sharp. You mean to go now? Storm will help. Folks shut their doors. He won't expect company. He pulled his coat from the hook and strapped his holster around his waist. The weight of the revolver settled on his hip like an old truth. Can I come? He shook his head. You stay here. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. Understand? Willa bit her lip, then nodded. You'll bring her back? That's the plan. He opened the door. Wind surged in like a wild thing, tugging at his coat, stirring the embers in the hearth. Before he stepped out, Willa spoke again, her voice small and certain. He won't let her go easy. Gideon didn't look back. Neither will I. The ride to town was quick and silent, the storm moving in fast behind him. Lightning split the sky as he tied his horse behind the livery stable. The preacher's house stood tall and arrogant, lanterns still burning in 2 front windows. From this angle, the upper window, the attic, was dark. No glow. No movement. But something was up there. He could feel it. He crept around the side of the house, keeping to the shadows. A loose shutter banged softly against the wall with every gust. He moved like he had 20 years ago, before time and regret had settled into his bones. Back when he was still a man folks feared in the right way. The back door was locked as expected. But the cellar window wasn't. He popped it open, dropped inside, and found himself in a root cellar that smelled of mold and old grief. Shelves lined the walls, jars of preserves long turned cloudy. A rusted rake leaned in one corner beside a broken stool. He climbed the stairs slow, listening for movement. Upstairs, the house creaked, settling or breathing, it was hard to tell which. He opened the cellar door and stepped into the kitchen, gun drawn. Silence. He moved through the house room by room, parlor, study, hallway, each one clean, ordered, unnatural. No signs of a struggle. No sign of Maybelle. But every so often he'd catch a faint sound, boards shifting, a soft rustle, something weighty and human above his head. He found the attic stairs behind a locked door at the end of the hall. He picked the lock with a nail he'd carried for years, a habit from another life. The door creaked open. The stairs beyond rose steeply into darkness. Halfway up he heard it. A cough. Hoarse. Muffled. He climbed the rest quickly, gun steady. At the top, another door, this one bolted from the outside. He slid the bolt free. The attic smelled of dust and sweat and something older, shame maybe. A small window let in the occasional flash of lightning. In that momentary light he saw her. Maybelle sat on a thin mattress, legs drawn to her chest. Her hair was matted, her clothes ragged. One wrist was wrapped in cloth, stained dark. Her face turned toward him slowly as if the movement hurt. Are you real? She asked, voice cracked from disuse. He nodded. Gideon Black. Your sister sent me. She blinked hard, trying to sit up. Willa? She's safe. Maybelle started to cry, but no sound came. He crossed the room quickly, pulling a small knife to cut the frayed rope at her ankle. You hurt? He asked. She nodded. He said I was possessed. Said I needed to be purified. Every time I screamed, he prayed louder. Gideon's mouth went dry. He steadied her with one arm, then helped her to her feet. She staggered, then braced herself. Can you walk? Yes. Then we leave. They moved back down the stairs, cautious but quick. Every creak in the wood was thunder. When they reached the kitchen, Maybelle froze. He's here, she whispered. He's not asleep. He knows. Gideon tightened his grip on her arm. We go anyway. The front door opened just as they stepped into the hallway. Otis stood there, rain dripping from his coat, eyes lit with something feral. You've overstepped, Gideon. Gideon raised his gun. She's leaving. She is my daughter, Otis hissed. And she is ill. She's not the one who's sick. Otis stepped forward, unarmed but dangerous. You think I'll let you walk out with her? You think these people will believe you? A man who drinks with ghosts and lives like a hermit. Maybe not. But they'll believe a bullet. Otis smiled, cracked wide wrong. Then you'd best shoot fast. Suddenly he lunged. Gideon fired. The bullet clipped Otis's shoulder, spinning him back against the wall. He grunted, clutched at the wound, but didn't fall. Maybelle cried out, frozen. Run! Gideon shouted. They bolted through the parlor into the night. Rain lashed the porch, wind howling like a warning. They made it to the stables, Gideon half dragging Maybelle before he heard Otis shout behind them. Another gunshot split the air, this one missing them by feet. Gideon shoved Maybelle into the saddle, untied the reins with shaking fingers. Otis fired again. Splinters exploded near his head. He swung into the saddle behind her and kicked the horse hard. They rode. Through the storm, through mud and fury, with death at their heels. Maybelle clung to him weakly, her breath warm against his neck. Lightning lit the trail in white flashes, thunder punching the sky apart. Behind them, no more shots, just the pounding of hooves in Gideon's memory. They didn't stop until they reached the shelter of the canyon pass, a shallow cave he'd used once during a cattle drive. He pulled the horse inside, dismounted, and helped Maybelle down. She collapsed onto the stone floor, shivering. He grabbed the blanket from his saddlebag and wrapped it around her. Water? She rasped. He handed her the canteen. She drank, coughed, then drank again. Is he dead? She asked. No. Not yet. She nodded like she understood something grim and necessary. Gideon sat beside her, soaked and silent. I used to sing, Maybelle said. Willa said she remembered. She does. He tried to make me forget who I was. Said if I didn't repent, I'd go to hell. You were already there. She let out a breath, half laugh, half sob. I don't know what comes next, she whispered. You don't have to know. Just breathe. 1 hour at a time. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the cave in stark white. I was afraid I'd never hear the rain again, she said. Now it was all around them, pouring, cleansing, real. Gideon looked out at the night, then at the woman beside him. Torn down but not broken. Not yet. Willa had been right. Maybelle was still in there, beneath the bruises and silence. And Otis Granger? He was wounded, exposed. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. The rain stopped sometime before dawn. A pale mist hung low over the canyon, curling between the rocks like breath from some great sleeping animal. Gideon stood at the cave entrance, his coat pulled tight against the chill. He hadn't slept. Neither had Maybelle, though she'd closed her eyes a few times and drifted in that restless, fragile state where sleep hovered just out of reach. He watched the sky lighten, the stars fading one by one. In the east, the first blush of sun touched the horizon. Behind him, Maybelle stirred. Her voice, hoarse but steady, broke the silence. He won't run. Gideon turned. She was sitting now, legs folded under her, blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. Otis, she said. He won't hide. He'll twist it. He always does. I know, Gideon said. Which is why we're not hiding either. She looked down at her hands, the way her fingers curled into each other like they were afraid of being seen. You don't owe us this. I didn't say I did. Then why? He paused. Because I didn't stop it before. Not this. But something like it. Long time ago. Maybelle looked at him, eyes searching. She didn't ask for details. Maybe she didn't need to. Gideon walked to the horse, checking the saddle and gear. You feel strong enough to ride? She nodded. I'll manage. They set out slowly, cutting through the back trails to avoid the main road. The sun burned away the mist as they went, and by the time Ash Hollow came into view, the heat was already rising off the dirt. The town looked different now, smaller, less certain. Or maybe that was just Gideon's eyes, sharpened by purpose. When they reached the outskirts, Willa came running from the ranch house. She nearly tripped over her own feet in her rush to reach them. Maybelle slipped off the horse just in time to catch her in her arms. "You came back," Willa whispered into her sister's chest. "I promised," Maybelle said, holding her tight. Willa looked up at Gideon. "He knows, doesn't he?" "He knows." They didn't waste time. The three of them rode into town together, one man, two sisters, and the storm that followed them. Eyes turned. Doors opened just enough to glimpse the truth walking through. At the center of town, Gideon dismounted and helped Maybelle down. Willa stood on one side of her, Gideon on the other. They walked straight into the saloon. Inside, the room fell to hush. The morning drinkers froze mid-sip. The barkeep paused with a glass in his hand. Sheriff Talbot sat at the corner table, a mug of coffee in front of him, unread newspaper folded on his lap. He saw them and he stood. Gideon didn't give him a chance to speak. "She's got something to say. And this time, everyone's gonna listen." Talbot looked at Maybelle, then at the crowd gathering behind her. Otis hadn't arrived yet, but it wouldn't be long. The man was too careful to miss an opportunity to spin the narrative. Time was tight. Maybelle stepped forward, her voice quiet but unshaking. "My name is Maybelle Granger. I didn't run away. I was locked in the attic by my father, Otis. For months." A murmur rippled through the saloon. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "No." She went on. "He said I was sick, that God was punishing me. But it wasn't about God. It was about control, about power. He hurt me. And he threatened to hurt my sister if I spoke." Talbot shifted uncomfortably. "You got proof of that?" "I am the proof," she said. "My scars, my memories, my silence until now. That should be enough." The room held its breath. Talbot looked around, perhaps hoping someone else would speak first. But no one did. So he cleared his throat and said, "That's a strong claim. But folks around here, they trust your father." Maybelle looked him straight in the eye. "That's because he knows how to make you feel safe while he makes others disappear." Then the doors swung open. Otis Granger stood in the threshold, shoulders broad, shirt clean despite the sling on his arm. His eyes scanned the room, resting last on his daughters. He smiled. "Well now," he said, voice as smooth as ever, "seems there's a bit of confusion." "Stay where you are," Talbot said, finally drawing his weapon. Not raised, but visible. Otis looked amused. "Really, Sheriff? You'd turn a gun on a man of God based on the word of a prisoner?" Gideon interrupted. "She's not the one on trial here. You are." Otis's eyes narrowed. "Is that right? You drag my daughter out into the wilderness, fill her head with lies, and now you think you're some kind of savior?" "I didn't fill her head," Gideon said. "I listened." "Which is more than you ever did." Otis stepped forward, and this time Talbot did raise the gun. "That's far enough," he said. Otis raised his hands mockingly. "I see. The mob has spoken." "No mob," Gideon said. "Just truth. And it's got teeth now." Otis's mask slipped for just a moment, something in his eyes sharp and ugly, but he caught it quick, turning instead to the people around him. "You all know me. You've heard me preach. Sat in my home. I baptized your children, buried your dead. Do you really think I'm capable of such evil?" No one answered. Then from the back, Myrtle Delancey's voice trembled. "I do." All heads turned. She stepped forward, pale but resolute. "I heard Willa's cries. I saw the bruises. I told myself it wasn't my place. I was wrong." Another voice followed. "The blacksmith. He told my boy to keep away from their house. Said Maybelle was dangerous. That's not what you say about your own blood." Then a younger woman spoke. "He told me she'd run off with a man. Said she brought shame. But Maybelle never would have left Willa behind." The tide turned fast after that. Otis stood frozen, mouth open, as the town began to speak. Piece by piece, they pulled the curtain down, revealing what had been ignored for too long. Talbot moved toward him slowly. "Otis Granger, I'm placing you under arrest for unlawful imprisonment and assault." "You're making a mistake," Otis said, voice strained now. "You're letting fear speak louder than faith." Talbot didn't flinch. "You made that mistake first." Gideon watched it all unfold with a kind of quiet finality. Otis didn't resist. He just let the sheriff cuff him, pride broken, mask discarded. As they led him out, Maybelle stood straighter, like something heavy had finally been lifted off her chest. But not everything was finished. Outside, people gathered. Some watched in silence. Others offered quiet apologies to Willa and Maybelle. A few wept not just for what had happened, but for how long it had. Gideon remained beside them, his presence a wall, steady and silent. "You think they'll change?" Willa asked. "They already have," Maybelle said. "They just don't know it yet." Later, when the sheriff had gone and the saloon emptied, Maybelle leaned against the post outside and looked out toward the open road. "You didn't have to come back," she said. Gideon didn't answer right away. "I did." "You still think you're just a rancher?" He smiled faintly. "I think I'm whatever the moment demands." Maybelle looked toward her sister, who had found a spot on the steps and was now drawing something in the dust with a stick. Her face was softer, lighter. "She never gave up on me," she whispered. "No, she didn't. And you believed her. Didn't take much. Just had to listen." They stood together a while longer. The sun had crested fully now, warm against their backs. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered, in the wet dirt, in the bruises, in the eyes of the crowd that had watched a preacher fall. Yet there was something else too. A shift. A spark. Ash Hollow had turned its head, finally. And what it saw could never be unseen. Gideon stepped off the porch and stretched his legs. "You girls ready?" he asked. "There's work to be done." "Work?" Willa looked up, grinning. "What kind?" "The kind that don't wait on permission." Maybelle smiled. "I'm ready." They walked toward the horses, a trio carved by fire and shadow, stepping into a morning that didn't belong to fear anymore. And though none of them said it, they all felt it. The worst had been spoken. Now came the living. The morning rode in golden and weightless, as if the sky itself had been scrubbed clean. Gideon stood near the edge of the ridge overlooking the pasture where the cattle grazed, hat tilted low against the rising sun. A wind stirred through the tall grass, whispering the kinds of truths that had long gone unspoken in Ash Hollow. He inhaled the scent of dew, dirt, and horses. Peace had settled across the ranch, but it was the kind earned after fire, not before it. Behind him, Maybelle tightened the last of the straps on her saddle. She moved with confidence now, not the kind born of bravado, but one sharpened in hardship and etched into her spine. Her eyes no longer scanned for hidden threats. Her voice no longer hesitated. That girl in the attic, scared and silenced, had burned away like fog at sunrise. What remained was a woman who had come through hell and now chose to walk forward rather than run. Willa skipped rocks near the river bend, her laughter echoing across the land. It was the kind of sound that should have been impossible after what she'd lived through. But children had a way of pulling life back into the world like weeds through broken floorboards. Gideon glanced over at Maybelle. "She's louder." "She's free," Maybelle said. "Loud comes with it." He smiled. "How you sleeping?" "Like someone who doesn't hear footsteps on the stairs anymore." They both knew the silence wouldn't last forever. The sheriff had taken Otis to the county jail in Junction Pass, but men like him didn't sit in cells without stirring up dust. There was still his congregation, those who didn't want to believe they'd followed a monster. Already, whispers rolled in like tumbleweeds, dry and bitter. Some folks questioned Maybelle's truth. Others stayed quiet, waiting to see who came out on top. But the sisters didn't flinch anymore. They'd stood in the center of the fire and lived. Their backs were straight, their hearts open. It had been 2 weeks since Otis's arrest. 2 weeks of calm that felt unnatural. Gideon had started checking the trail twice a day, looking for riders who didn't belong. He wasn't being paranoid. He was being prepared. That morning he spotted the tracks first. 2 horses, fast-moving. Not locals. Coming from the east, cutting through brush that no one used unless they wanted to avoid being seen. He followed the trail for a half-mile until he spotted them. 2 men, lean and dust-covered, pistols on their hips and that particular twitch in their shoulders that screamed hired trouble. He turned back fast. By the time he reached the homestead, Maybelle had Willa inside with the rifle loaded and propped by the door. "They're coming?" she asked. 2 of them. Guns visible. Moving like they got a purpose. Maybelle nodded once. "Otis sent them." "Could be." "No, it is. He's not gonna rot quietly." Gideon saddled the horses in silence. "We could ride for Junction Pass. Get the sheriff." "And leave the ranch?" Maybelle shook her head. "No. We stay." He studied her, then nodded. "We stay." The men arrived near dusk. The first one, blond and wolfish, rode with a smirk that never touched his eyes. The other was broader, darker, his face a cold slab carved by years of bad decisions. They dismounted without a word, walking toward the porch like they'd been expected. "Evenin'," the blond one said, tipping his hat. "You Gideon Hale?" "I am. We're looking for the Granger girls. We heard they'd been staying here." Gideon didn't answer. Maybelle stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, aimed low but not idle. "You found us," she said. The blonde smiled wider. "Well, now that makes things easy. We just need y'all to come with us. No fuss. Your daddy's waitin'. Wants to clear a few things up. He's not my father anymore." The dark one took a step forward. "This ain't a request." Gideon's hand hovered near his sidearm. "Then maybe you ought to turn around now before this gets loud." "You threatenin' us, cowboy?" "No. I'm warning you." For a beat, no one moved. Then the dark one went for his gun. Gideon was faster. The shot cracked like thunder, echoing off the hills. The man staggered back, clutching his thigh, screaming as he fell. The blonde lunged, but Maybelle's bullet slammed into the dirt just inches from his foot. He froze. "That next one ain't a warning," she said. He raised his hand slowly, breathing hard. "You don't know what you just did. Otis ain't the type to forget this." "I hope he doesn't," Gideon said. "Means he'll see it coming next time." Talbot arrived that night with 2 deputies and took both men into custody. He listened carefully to the account, but his face was already pinched with worry. "Otis must have sent word from the jail," he said. "There's folks in Junction Pass who still think he walks on water. If someone slipped him a message." "He's pulling strings," Gideon said. "Even behind bars." Talbot sighed. "I'll put in a formal request to have him transferred east. More secure. But you'd best keep alert." They already were. The next days were quieter, but tension hung like storm clouds ready to crack. Maybelle didn't let it show, though. She repaired the fence line, branded calves, and even got Willa to help repaint the barn door. They planted new seeds by the riverbank, Gideon's idea. Said it gave the land something to live for again. On the 3rd morning a letter arrived. No stamp. Just left on the fence post, tucked under a horseshoe nail. Gideon read it first, jaw tightening. Then he handed it to Maybelle. The handwriting was Otis's. Neat. Precise. You may have fooled them. But blood remembers. And faith don't die easy. The Lord sees all. She folded the letter carefully, then tossed it into the fire without a word. That night they sat on the porch watching the stars. The ranch was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes with endurance, not ignorance. "You think he'll stop?" Willa asked. "No," Maybelle said. "But he won't win either." Gideon looked at her, and in her eyes he didn't see fear. He saw something harder, stronger. Not vengeance. Not anger. Conviction. "He'll try to twist this story," she said. "Make himself the victim. Paint me as the prodigal. But the truth's out now." "Truth's a stubborn thing," Gideon said. "Won't stay buried long." Willa leaned her head on Maybelle's shoulder. "Do we leave here one day?" "Maybe," Maybelle whispered. "But not running. Only walking." The next week Otis's transfer was denied. Some technicality. Some whisper from someone with influence. Talbot was furious, but there was nothing to be done yet. That night, fires were set to 3 barns in Ash Hollow. Not the Grangers, but neighbors. Messages. Fear tactics. The town gathered. Some outraged. Some uncertain. But this time Maybelle stood in front of them all. "I used to think silence was the only way to survive," she said. "But silence is what kept him strong. No more." She told them everything. Not just what Otis had done, but how they'd all let it happen. How fear and image had made them blind. Some wept. Others couldn't meet her gaze. But no one walked away. The town stood beside her after that. Not because they pitied her, but because they believed her. Because they saw her. For the first time truly. Gideon watched from the back, hands on his belt, pride rising slow and sure in his chest. Later, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Maybelle approached him. "You ever think about leaving?" "Used to. Now, not so much." She nodded. "Same." He studied her, the way the firelight flickered in her hair. "You know, you could run this place." She smirked. "Could. Will," he corrected. They stood close. The kind of close that didn't beg for touch, but understood it might come later, when it mattered most. "I think I finally know who I am," she said. Gideon tipped his hat. "You always did. Just needed the world to catch up." They watched the stars rise, brighter now somehow. The past had left scars, sure. But it also left lessons. And Maybelle Granger wasn't a victim anymore. She was the fire they didn't see coming. and this time no one would put her out.